Okay, boys, we are returning into interview series. So this is CL.
전 그 루페온 서버 기상술사 키우고 있는 PL이 기상술사 나왔을 때부터 게임은 컴베타 때 했다가 그 낙원의 문 때 잠깐 접었다가 시즌 2 때 복.
So we're gonna go to Trixian and talk about Aeromancer in basics and if he has anything else to share with us. So we're gonna start with the basics of learning what kind of build he has.
일단은 저는 지금 고치명 악몽 기상술사 사용하고 가기는 이제 원한 저밭 돌대 하대 질풍 아들. 원래 제가 엘릭서가 발인에 5가 양쪽 둘 다 5라서 저는 무조건 지배를 썼었거든요. 지배를 쓰다가 카멘 나오고 나서 이제 각성기가 부족해서 업타임이 안 나오니까 그때부터 악몽을 해야겠다 해가지고 악몽을 했는데
네.
생각보다 손에 잘 맞아서 계속 악몽하고.
So the question that I gave him was, what about the other builds that he used? Because during Theomine race, he played Dominion 1 with the elixirs at Masters. So as he's shown you, he has both Masters and he has both critical elixirs. Back then, without the balance patch, you guys have this balance patch now, we didn't have enough Awakenings points. There were at least at minimum 4 minutes empty time frame for them to DPS without a relic gear. So that wasn't enough. So this doesn't apply to you guys because you guys have the balance patch before. He swapped to 6 Nightmare, adding in more crit. Therefore, he can change the elixirs to critical because critical versus master is based on crit rate. So he switched that and then he gave Adrenaline 1 to add a little bit more crit on top of it. When I asked that afterwards, you can do the Dominion build, but the issue is you need to cut different rocks. It doesn't feel as clean that as he says. So since he's comfortable with this particular build with the 6 Nightmare on the DPS and the difference is that high in his perspective, he's keeping the build itself.
21을 한 번도 안.
What about Drizzle, right? So I asked him about what do you know about Drizzle. Apparently he didn't try Drizzle one bit because it's not his style of play. As for those of you guys who are wondering how come you don't play Drizzle, it's a different play style. So also on a side note, he plays Knight's Edge too. Basically he likes fast APM, fast moving characters, and Drizzle is not one of them. So I'm assuming that's would be the reason. It's a similar playstyle too. So we're gonna go over each skill and what is going to link towards his playstyle that he's doing.
처음엔 이제 돌개바람 에너지 10레벨을 해서 우산 복제를 쓰면은 우산이 사거리가 짧아지는데 타수가 엄청 많아지고 이제 삭스라고 단심을 원할 때 빠르게 키기 위해서 그러니까 단제가 터지고 떼약볕은 이건 이제 메인 딜링기는 아닌데 무력이랑 그 악몽 끝마 진입기로 마나를 많이 빼주는 그래서 빠준 전기 조절 직접 폭발 그냥 DPS 높은 호 그냥 찍어놔. 칼바람 메인 주력 역류 스킬이고 기본적으로 다 찍는 특포인데 화려한 움직임하고 거대 돌풍 같은 경우에는 DPS적으로는 똑같은데 이 화려한 움직임은 그 이렇게 360도 돌리는 이런 스킬이고 거대 돌풍은 앞으로 검기를 날리면서 이게 후딜이 더 적어서 몰아치기 이것도 이제 떼약벽보단 강한 서브 딜링기고 이제 영유의 공간배기 그냥 기본 국룰 스킬 이제 싹쓸바람 단죄 뛰는 스킬이고 원거리에서 이제 무력도 준수하고 파괴도 달려있고 경면도 있는 기상 스킬을 쓸 거면 이걸 제일 먼저 채용해야 되는 완소 코도 그냥 DPS 우선으로 마준 소멸 전기 조절 찍어놨고 대부분 이제 이걸로 먼저 써서 단제를 터트리고 단제를 보고 돌개바람 시너지 넣고 사이클 시작하는 내려치기는 기류 발생 스킬 이게 튼튼한 우산이 있고 낙뢰가 있는데 이 특포를 낙뢰를 찍으면 이제 앞으로 이동을 하지만 튼튼한 우산은 2타가 되는 거 근데 1타만 찍어도 기류가 터지기 때문에 이게 딜레이가 훨씬 줄어들어서 튼튼한 우산이 더 길 연계 자체로 이것만 해도 기류가 발생되기 때문에 딜레이적으로도 이득이고 경면을 좀 더 길게 가져가고 싶으면 이제 2타를 써서 경면 유지하는 다음에 이제 펼치기 이것도 이제 메인 기류 스킬이자 카운터 고치명 기상술사 같은 경우에는 신속이 자체적으로 맥스가 아니기 때문에 펼치기에 있는 가벼운 발걸음 요 이속 버프로 질풍 각인에 있는 치적을 땡기는 용도고요. 그러니까 펼치기에 카운터랑 위류 그리고 이속 버프까지 세 가지가 묶여 있는 마지막 특허 날카로운 장막 찍게 되면은 그 안 찍으면은 기본 펼치기는 이렇게 찌르면서 이 앞쪽만 카운터 판정이 있고 풀 맞춰야 이렇게 당겨지는데 펼치기를 10레벨 찍어서 날카로운 장막 게 되면 원뿔형으로 이렇게 범위가 늘어나게 돼. 옆으로
옛날에
옆치기가
이걸로 1관 카운터 했잖아요.
옆치기가 되는 거예요.
예, 예.
바람 송곳은 이제 기상수사 제일 강한 역류, 힘센 바람, 집중 공격 쓰고 이게 딜레이가 좀 길니까 전설 직군까지. 칼바람이랑 바송이랑 거의 비슷한데 바송이 조금 더.
I asked about any other additional skills that he wants to mention, and which is tornado dance. What some other people do is they replace tornado dance with scorching sun, right? And the reason why is because tornado dance do bring up a little bit more damage that you can bring up to the table by using swift fingers, keen strike instead of reversal, because you already have 2 reversal skills on your main DPS, and then you have the super speed spin. But most people tend to go Scorching Sun anyway because it spends more mana, and spending a lot of mana is actually pretty important to get you to boundless mana state, which you will probably talk about during the playstyle cycles. Scorching Sun itself have high stagger. Another things that I mentioned was the Tornado Dance and Whirlpool. Some builds swap that Scorching Sun and the Wiping Wind is because if you have the Hallucination set instead of Nightmare, because some people go Hallucination instead. The mana usage is way too high, therefore you swap these 2 skills into a less costing mana skill and then utilize it accordingly there. So for the Nightmare build, which you guys are seeing here, you need at least 1600 crit stat, and you add in the heavier mana draining skills. But if you use the Hallucination one, you give more on swiftness because you get more crit on top of that, right? So the Nightmare version is a little bit harder to play, but it opens more potential to like higher ceiling. Hallucination version will be much easier because you don't have to worry about like mana control, etc. Those 2 builds are definitely open for any players who would prefer to have like an easier play versus you want to have a little bit of harder control play, can have a higher potential of the DPS output. So that means we should cover both of them on the playstyle to show you guys how it actually operates. So going over the gems a little bit, he covered all cooldown and damage gem on all the skills that he uses as damage, which is Piercing Wind, he has Rage, he has Scorching Sun, and he also has Wiping Wind, and then he has the Wind Gimlet, right? And then all the extra ones, and then with the additional slots that you have 2 choices. So he added in Fox Rain. Apparently Fox Rain is not as big damage pie taker for Windfury. He said it's about like 5%, so you don't really need a damage gem there. But for those of you who are, you know, a little bit newer to Aeromancer and having a little bit of problem, you also have a choice to put in Spread as a cooldown gem, so that if you happen to miss, you can get spread back really quickly. All right, so there's 2 choices there. But he added in damage gem for Fox Rain just to increase it just a little more during the identity phase when he turns it on. So these days he doesn't swap Ether Predator, but before he used to. Yeah, so he has Cursed Doll Stone, so you can't really swap Cursed Doll. Now the next topic is let's cover the playstyles and like the management of the particular build that he plays first, and then since he mentioned the Hallucination one, let's cover the Hallucination one afterwards.
싹쓸이 단적 돌개가 심판. 그래서 첫 사이클은 무조건 싹쓸 펼치기 돌개로 시작합니다. 펼치기 하면 단제가 터지기 때문에 심판까지 완벽하게 터지고.
So ADQ to activate your conviction and judgment.
펼치기 하고 몰아치기 먼저. 이게 쿨타임이 짧기 때문에. 몰아치기 그다음에 칼바람. 기류를 이렇게 계속 번갈아서 써야 돼.
오케이.
연계해서 보여드리면.
네.
칼바람. 그다음에 다시 펼치기 오면은 하고 남을 때 약별 하면 끝말을.
오.
끝나고 가면은 계속 스킬을 갈겨가지고 쿨타임이 기류 스킬에 다 소킹이 붙어있거든. 그래서 계속 기류를 굴리면서 전체적인 쿨을 줄여서 끝맛 때 딜을 많이 넣고 마중 때는 이제 한방 딜 넣는 위주.
오.
이렇게 하고 이제 만화를 상태를 보고 내가 끝말을 진입할지 조금 더 딜레이해서 보낼지 만화 컨트롤을 계속 해주면서 계속 기류 역류 굴리기만 하고.
One thing I also ask him about, what about your identity? When do you use identity? So what's important for identity is, as you guys know, the engraving, when you activate the identity, you get additional attack speed and stuff. And then the higher that you get, you do more DPS, right? So it is important for you to activate the identity so that you don't have to rely on spread for the additional movement speed. Therefore, when you're about to use your main DPS skill, which is the Piercing Wind and Wind Gimlet, you make sure to have the identity on top of it so that you have the most efficient burst that you need on your cycle. And this is all during Magic Addiction. So I'm gonna ask him to do the Magic Addiction combo, and then you guys can see him spamming the skill during Boundless Mana. And then when he comes back to Magic Addiction again, he rotates it again based on the situation, which is like when the boss stands still, he kind of attacks it differently. But when the boss moves it around, he's going to do it differently as well. That's the key point, because that's how you burst with the cycle. And then when the cycle burst is done, you'll be pianoing the rest to make sure that you are doing it properly. So as he mentioned, it is very important to go into Boundless Mana when you want to. So that's like a key point to make sure that you deliver the top DPS, top efficiency. And now when he's back into the max mana, he's doing the cycle DPS because you do more damage accordingly. Alright. So if you want.
핵심 중에 하나가 이 칼바람하고 가송을 같이 안 써가지고 이 쿨이 같이 안 돌게 계속 만들어주는 무한으로.
So we're also gonna cover the hallucination build that he mentioned before, with the full swift hallucination that some people do play on. Difference between that, as he talked about during the skills, when we were talking about skills, was he needs to swap Wiping Wind and Scorching Sun. So the engraving is the same for the hallucination build, it's just that the stat weight is a little bit different. You add more swiftness on top of it.
그냥 아까 말한 것처럼 그 기류 역류 굴리는 건 아까랑 완전 똑같고요.
Because of mana difference, the skill rotation is exactly the same. It's just that, think about the Wiping Wind and Scorching Sun is replaced by Whirlpool and Tornado Dance. So the cycle is a little bit different and you'll probably spam a little bit more. It's just that you don't have to worry about Boundless Mana and Magic Addiction. So let's see the cycle for this particular variation. 비슷한데요?
비슷하죠? 완전 똑같이 굴려요.
So
양몽도 이거를 쓸 수 있기 때문에.
So the conviction judgment, the cycle of the skills between like the shield gain and shield spending is exactly the same. It's just that you don't have to worry about magic addiction and boundless mana. That's the difference.
아 근데 나 이거 투포를 잘못 찍었다. 패치기 이걸 찍어야 돼. 만화.
So you need more mana. Okay. So for hallucination, as you guys that he's been showing, is he needs to swap the tripod for spread to the magic cycle to recover the mana back, because you're doing hallucination, not nightmare. So you're kind of generating mana at the same time on your spread skill. So as he mentioned here, was the advantage position for this particular variation of the build is you don't have to worry about mana difference. You don't have to worry about when to use your identity because you're full swiftness anyway. You would just be pianoing the whole time, not worrying about too much. That's good. So I wanted to cover that. I think we covered most of it. And then the next one is I seen some questions. So the first one is like I saw some synergies, right? So I'm asking what kind of synergies you would like to see.
제일 좋은 거는 구치를 깎아가지고 아들을 채우고 이제 팔찌에서 또 치명을 채운 다음에 이제 창술이나 반각이나 뭐 그런 거 딜적인 에너지를 받는 게 제일.
So these days I asked him like what are some of the Windfury Aeromancers do these days in Korea, and so this particular build, at before there were a lot of Dominions, right? But right now most people are switching to the 6 Nightmare or 6 Hallucination, right? The thing is, the engraving choices and all these things, all these attributes are exactly the same. It's just that they're difference in stat attribution. You know, so if you have Hallucination, you add more on Swift. and you have a little bit of a swiftier play. Versus if you do the Nightmare, you have high crit, you have a little bit less swift, but the general playstyle is still about, swifty and quick. It's just that when you get into raids like really difficult, let's say like Theomine, like the first, right, the Eclipse, all that stuff, you can play the swiftness one with Hallucination so that you have more maneuver abilities and it's easier to play. But if you're doing like a homework raid or a reclear raid, you can swap to the Nightmare version and then burst accordingly to take some more pies from the boss. Most people say they take pies, right? The DPS pie.
일단은 악몽만 가지고 있긴 한데 97이 깎이면 세팅 2개 할 생각이긴 해.
And as for gems, for DPS, focus on Wind Gimlet and Piercing Wind for the highest. And then you kind of go to the next one, which is Rainstorm and Tornado Dance for Hallucination build. But if you're playing the Nightmare one, you're playing White Wind, Scorching Sun for next DPS, a gem, and the rest is like pretty much whatever you want. But in terms of the cooldown gems, Wind Gimlet, Piercing Wind, Rage to rotate as much as you can because those are your main key points to do it. But the other stuff can rather be a little bit lower. As for elixirs, I think what we mentioned was they use critical now. They don't use master because master was used for Dominion. As for critical, since 6 Nightmare goes high crit, so you would go critical. And as for Hallucination build, you also go for critical as well. So from there, this wraps up the basics that we talked about, and then we're gonna wrap up with him doing just like a Guardian raid just to see the performance of the particular build at the latest Guardian raid. So now he's going to Magic Addiction, right? He's doing his cycle right now. This big burst. Spread again, and then using the other DPS skill, using the shield skill, using the other shield spender. And then by the time he kind of rotates it for the second time, he goes to Boundless Mana, which is the this is the piano stage, where he also has quick recharge on spread and the smash, the downward strike. So he's repeating, and then he's back to Magic Addiction. So he's going to be repeating the same process, the big DPS cycle. And since you have Nightmare, you don't have to worry too much about mana. It's just that you need to pay attention that you are going into Magic, Boundless Mana from Magic Addiction. That's like the key point that you need to make sure to keep in mind. There you go. So as you see, he always starts with, spread, and he also uses downward strike before he uses major shield spender skill, right? Okay, so when he got that 3 bubble in, he's rotating his major DPS. Cycle, and then he just goes to Boundless Mana again, then he just piano again now, and then he went back to Magic. So you just need to pay attention to go back and forth on Magic Addiction versus Boundless Mana. Keep that in touch. That's about it. And the key skills that brings him to Boundless Mana is the Scorching Sun and the Whirling Wind and stuff, because Scorching Sun has a lot of mana cost to activate the skill. Look at his numbers. That's a big number class. Nice, he's phasing. And then when he phases, he comes back. So you get that cooldown buff, but generally, most of the Korean Guardian raids, this guy dies as soon as this happens. So this one, so you get a cooldown buff if you counter him. So he has much faster cooldowns, which is pretty good for most classes. Boom! So this is his Soul Eater. So I asked him, he plays the Night Edge Soul Eater. So later in the future, maybe we can do another session like this for Night Edge Soul Eater for you guys. Okay? Cool. So that was Aeromancer player CL. He is coming with us for Echidna raid with his Aeromancer. And that wraps it up for the interview, guys. Thank you, guys.